You've probably heard this phrase in a meeting. That's interesting. It sounds positive, encouraging even. But in many British workplaces, it doesn't always mean that. Sometimes it signals curiosity, sometimes it signals hesitation, and sometimes it's a very polite way of saying, I'm not convinced. Understanding the difference can completely change how you interpret professional conversations. Let's look at why. Imagine you're in a team meeting. You've analysed a problem carefully. You've prepared your suggestion. You explain how adjusting the timeline could reduce delivery risk. Your manager listens carefully. Then they respond, That's interesting. The tone is calm, polite, professional. But the conversation moves on almost immediately. No follow-up questions, no exploration of the idea. Just the next item on the agenda. Later, you realise something. Nothing actually changed. The idea was acknowledged. But it didn't gain momentum. That's often where cultural nuance begins to matter. British professional communication tends to value politeness and restraint. Direct disagreement can sometimes feel unnecessarily confrontational. So instead of saying, I don't think that will work, you might hear something softer. That's interesting. Or, that's one way to look at it. These phrases acknowledge the contribution without immediately committing to it. They keep the conversation respectful. But the real evaluation of the idea may still be happening beneath the surface. So how do you know whether the phrase signals curiosity or hesitation? The key is what happens next. When someone is genuinely interested, they usually ask questions. For example, that's interesting. How would that work in practice? Or, that's interesting. Have you seen this approach used elsewhere? Questions indicate engagement. They show the idea is being explored. But when the phrase appears alone, without curiosity or follow-up, it often signals reservation instead. Not rejection, just doubt. Let's look at another situation. You're presenting a proposal to improve internal reporting. You explain how a different structure could make information clearer for leadership. The response comes quickly. That's interesting. Then a pause, and the conversation shifts to another topic. No discussion, no questions, no request for more detail. In this situation, the phrase often means, I'm not convinced yet. But the response is delivered politely, which means the disagreement may not be obvious at first. Of course, the phrase does not always signal hesitation. Sometimes it genuinely means curiosity. Imagine presenting a new approach during a strategy discussion. You explain how a different process could simplify decision-making. A colleague replies, That's interesting. Tell me more about how that would work. Now the phrase is followed by exploration. The room becomes more engaged. People ask questions. The conversation expands. That is genuine interest. Curiosity generates discussion. When people want to explore an idea, they naturally start asking how it works. That's the key signal to watch for. Senior leaders often use indirect language deliberately. It allows them to acknowledge ideas without reacting too quickly. It also keeps discussions calm and constructive. Imagine a leadership meeting where several proposals are being considered. A director might say, That's interesting. Not because the idea is weak, but because they want to hear how others in the room respond before giving a firm opinion. The phrase creates space in the conversation, and sometimes that pause encourages other people to contribute. In many professional environments, especially in the UK, this type of language acts as a conversational buffer. It allows ideas to be acknowledged without immediately accepting or rejecting them. Let's look at another situation that appears quite often in international teams. You're presenting a proposal during a planning discussion. You've prepared carefully, and you explain how a small process change could improve efficiency. A colleague listens and replies, "That's interesting." But this time something different happens. Another person in the room asks a question. Someone else adds a comment. The conversation begins to expand. Now the phrase has acted as an invitation rather than a dismissal. In other words, the words themselves are not always the message. The surrounding reaction often tells you much more. When people lean forward, ask questions, or build on the idea, the phrase usually signals genuine interest. When the phrase appears alone and the conversation moves on quickly, it often signals uncertainty instead. For professionals who did not grow up in British business culture, this type of language can feel difficult to interpret. In many cultures, communication is more direct. If someone disagrees with an idea, they say so clearly. So when someone responds politely without obvious criticism, it may sound like approval. But in British workplaces, polite language sometimes serves a different purpose. It allows the conversation to remain calm while people quietly evaluate the idea. Once you understand that pattern, phrases like, "That's interesting," become easier to interpret. You begin to notice the signals behind the words. One useful habit is to pay attention not only to the phrase itself, but also to the surrounding signals. Tone matters, body language matters, and follow-up behavior matters. Does the person ask a question? Do they lean forward with interest? Or does the conversation quickly move elsewhere? Those signals often reveal far more than the phrase itself. In professional communication, meaning is rarely carried by words alone. It is carried by context. Professional communication isn't only about vocabulary. It's about understanding the signals behind the language. Small phrases can carry more meaning than they appear to. And recognizing those signals can make international collaboration far easier. In the next video, we'll look at another important professional skill: how senior leaders disagree without sounding aggressive. Bye for now.